I do the kind of work you do, and I do it because I think it's the most important, and that's why I want to honor you. Because everyone's talking of Egypt and Libya these days, but they're forgetting that the real revolution is taking place. And the small farms and small communities where people are actually creating the real freedom. I mean, in Egypt and all, they're asking for a situation where they might have freedom. But you are working on realizing that freedom. So thank you so much, all of you, for everything you do. The Food Policy Council, and I know you work in such coherence across different communities. I mean, the kind of change that you brought, and I can feel the energy as I have dinners or I visit. I had that beautiful dinner in the Nature Conservation Center, where I met farmers, and listening to so many of you today, that at this point it is community enterprise. It's not an individual farmer struggling to redefine the path, but local government, local commissioners also wanting to put their weight behind creating an authentically rooted food system. And I think, therefore, whatever is happening in Oregon will have huge impacts on what happens in the United States. And what happens in the United States anyway has huge impact, and we'd rather have that impact be constructive than the destructive impact that the U.S. food policy is having. Just had an interview with the University TV, and Barbara, who was interviewing me, talked about Kissinger's old claim that, you know, when you control armies, you control governments. When you control food, you control people. And that's why he talked of food as a weapon. And for them, for the group that was creating the Vietnam War, and I had a very fortunate dinner opportunity last night to have dinner with Ellsberg, Daniel Ellsberg, of the Pentagon Papers, who is still so alive to the fact that the kind of manipulations that allow and justify wars haven't yet got over. And food, of course, food at this point is probably the biggest reason for conquest, oil and food. And food produced, distributed in the kind of peaceful ways in which you're working at, and we are trying to build in India and through Vandana, is, for me, the biggest peace movement. Yeah. Yes, you can protest against the war, but creating different conditions where wars stop being necessary, where grabbing other people's land in a highly dysfunctional food system. Can you imagine 2 million acres grabbed in Africa? And I would suggest to all of you, please pick up the rotten issue of Economist. This time they've got 14-page supplement on the future of food. And they're recognizing most of the problems that all of you recognize. And what do they offer? That the free-range cows of Africa are so unproductive that they must all be put into batteries. And then we'll have more food. Even though we know it takes 10 times more feed to produce the protein in chicken batteries or cattle batteries or pig batteries. And then they go on to say the opposite of what we work on in Navdanya, where we save seeds. And they're saying farmers' own supply of seed is a primitive system. And that's why Gates Foundation has this huge project for the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa to commercialize seed supply. And commercialized seed supply, of course, means very quickly to move into genetic engineering. So while we all work to build an alternative that works for nature, works for farmers, works for people, there is a huge expansion also of the system that is destroying nature, destroying farmers, and destroying people. So I had a few specific requests, and I'll try and weave it in to sharing with you what we do through Navdanya. Navdanya means 9 seeds. It's not just an NGO. I was compelled to start a not-for-profit because beyond a point, there's this many villages you can walk to save seeds individually. Beyond a point, you need community. And to make sure the community can work, I had to do the fundraising. And for that, you need a legal entity. So Navdanya is established as a trust. But I see it as a movement. The trust is just a way of getting the work done. It's not the end. The end really is making sure our farmers are not going down the path of high-cost external input farming, getting into debt, and 200,000 farm suicides is the government's data in what has happened since India's agriculture was globalized. So the first thing we did was create seed banks. And I didn't know how to do it, but I knew it had to be done. So I taught myself. And I knew someone who had set up the Genetic Resources Center of Nicaragua. Daniel Carroll is his name. So I sent him a message and said, come and teach me something about this. And he came and spent 4 or 5 days. But we basically collected everything that we could find. And we didn't turn it into a museum, which is what happens very often. And most of the national seed gene banks, they're not called seed banks, they're called gene banks, because what you're preserving is the genes, not the plant. And you're not preserving it for use by farmers. You're preserving it so some company, when they need the genes from that kind of resistance to a particular pest or drought resistance, can then pick it up. And that's why we also have this phenomena that I have called biopiracy, where companies just pick up seeds from these, what should be public resources, and then they privatize it. And we fought 3 biopiracy cases. One was against the patenting of neem, which is a tree we have, which is a wonderful pest control agent. And when the Bhopal disaster happened in 1984, I started a campaign, No More Bhopal's Plant a Neem, because you didn't have to have pesticides that kill people, because these wonderful trees give us pest control agents that don't kill anything. They control pests only by slowing down the reproduction, and they're totally safe. We eat the neem. Cows eat the neem. The twigs of the neem is the most important toothbrush in the villages. And if people always used to say, oh, Indians have such beautiful teeth. It's the neem. It's got tremendous antibacterial properties. You can never get cavities, never get tooth decay, and you never have to pay Colgate-Palmolive. The second was basmati, and the third was an ancient wheat variety that Monsanto picked up from a gene bank. All Indian wheats were collected during the British rule. They were collected in the Cambridge gene bank. Cambridge University was the top researcher on wheat in that time. And when privatization, there's a disease of privatization spreading everywhere. And when privatization happened, they sold it off to Levers, and then Monsanto bought from Levers, or at least had a partnership. And so Monsanto had all these varieties for free. And they took this variety and patented it because it has very low gluten. You were talking about low gluten foods, so they thought they'd make a killing. And they patented the wheat, they patented the plant, they patented the seed, they patented the flour, and they patented any flour, any product that could be made with low gluten. So of course we challenged this. The case is still going on in India's courts, but in the European Patent Office, where we filed a simultaneous case, within 4 months Monsanto withdrew the patent claim, knowing that we fought neem for 11 years, and they know we aren't going to give up in a hurry. So they packed up and ran. I think one book that's waiting to be written is how many defeats the biotech industry has had. We keep thinking of how big they are, how powerful they are, but how many of their applications have failed and never reached the market? Do you remember the Flavor Saver tomato? How many of you all remember the Flavor Saver? All of you remember the Flavor Saver. You know, it was supposed to be a tomato that never rots. And Jeremy Rifkin used to tell me all the time how at a press conference he took it and threw it against the wall and it bounced back like a ball. And you don't want tomatoes that don't dissolve. In Indian cooking, our staple seasoning is chop up the onions, chop up the tomato, and whatever is the spice, the cumin or whatever you have to add, and you season it. And the new tomatoes just sit there like lumps of meat, in my view, you know. They sit there like red pieces. They never, ever dissolve. Whereas the native tomatoes just become part of the curry. And by the way, curry is not a spice. I mean, British got a lot wrong. You know, but the one they got seriously wrong is curry, because they sell it like curry powder. You know, curry means something liquid. You know, a liquid dish is called curry, and a dry dish is called a bhaji. So they took the curry and then turned it into a spice, messed it up, and when you get that mixed masala, nobody in India cooks with that mixture. Because every vegetable has its own spice, you know. Different spices bring out the flavors of different vegetables and different dals. And not only do different spices go with different things, we have different oil seeds for different parts of the country. You know, the weather is different. South India you have coconut. In North India we do mustard. In the Deccan they have linseed and groundnut. And my God, you try and feed a North Indian with food cooked in coconut oil, they think they're eating someone's head, because we only apply coconut to the head. And in South India, if you were to bring them mustard, you wouldn't be able to touch it because they can't stand that pungency. Whereas we love it. And Bengalis love it. And if a fish curry with the mustard oil is the ultimate. So, of course, one of the things we had to work very hard at was defending our food culture against policies of globalization that have made it look like a diet of Pepsi, Coke, McDonald's should be the global diet. And we've seen what that diet's done to America in terms of obesity and disease. And it is spreading that kind of disease elsewhere. The schools of Delhi have had an obesity rate jump from 7% in 1995 to 14% in 2005 to 25% last year. Yeah? And basically it's disease being caused with full knowledge, because we know what that diet has done here. And I think I'm very happy to see Starbucks saying everything is safe there. But the point is, why should we even begin to create such artificial food when it's so much nicer and easier, if human beings are involved, to produce good food that's healthy for all? Now, in Navdanya, besides saving the seeds, in the seeds we see food culture. You know? That when you are protecting a seed, you're not just saving biological diversity, you are saving cultural diversity. Because that culture will go. If that food is not eaten in the future, that culture is gone, which is why the first foods of the indigenous communities here are so important. At the Food Justice Conference, we had a very, very good session on first foods, and I think it's so important.